The 8th Commandment violated, Parshat Yitro 5782. A couple days ago, I joined a conference call hosted by the Orthodox Union in which they were responding to the drama in Colleyville, Texas. High-ranking figures from the administration, such as the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, spoke. At the end of the call, a rabbi spoke, and he said that it was ironic that this hostage situation took place the very week we were reading Parshat Yitro, in which the 10 Commandments are given, because one of the commandments is lo tignov, do not steal, the 8th commandment, and he said that the hostage taker had transgressed this very commandment. Well, taking hostages is wrong, but did he transgress the commandment not to steal? According to the Talmud, absolutely he did. In fact, according to the Talmud in Sanhedrin, this is what the 8th commandment is forbidding: stealing humans, kidnapping, taking hostages. Not only that, it's a capital offense, according to the Talmud. It follows the 6th commandment, lo tirzach, thou shalt not murder, it's a capital offense. Lo tinaf, adultery, the 7th commandment, capital offense. And lo tignov, do not steal. In other words, do not kidnap, is also a capital offense. Now the question is, does the 8th commandment extend to stealing other things such as property? Well, the Talmud says, Seilmad, go learn that it could be derived from the context that also stealing property is forbidden, but not by the 8th commandment, elsewhere in the Torah. It points to a pasuk, a verse in Vayikra, lo tiknovu velo tachashu velo tishakru ish ba'amito. You shall not steal, you shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with somebody else. So what the Talmud is saying is, yes, stealing property is asur. It's forbidden, but it's not a violation of the 8th commandment. It's a violation of the command we find elsewhere in Vayikra. Now, let's ask this question: why isn't stealing property included in the 8th commandment? Why is it limited to kidnapping? Well, if you stop and think about it, it's actually quite obvious. Remember, we said it's a capital offense. Are you going to fry somebody for shoplifting? The shoplifter could be a teenage kid. Perhaps he hasn't had a good shake in life and he needs to be set straight. Not going to execute somebody for that. On the other hand, we certainly need a command against stealing, or else you have anarchy. Think about the Mabul, the flood. What was the sin that led to the flood, according to the Torah? The world was full of Hamas. It was full of violence, corruption. And Rashi explains this was really violent theft. That was the main sin of that generation, which led to the flood. So what we really see here is the broken window theory to crime prevention embedded within the Torah. The broken window theory of crime prevention was introduced in 1982 by social scientists James Q. Wilson and George L. Kelling, and it was used in the 1990s in New York City to reduce crime. The idea was that you crack down on small crimes, quality of life crimes, before criminals can escalate to more violent crimes. I'll give you an example. I remember years ago, I was in the subway in New York City, and I had walked down the stairs. I'm about to go through the turnstile, and I see some guy bolting down the stairs, and he jumped the turnstile and ran down and caught the train. The woman who worked for the MTA who was selling tickets, what did she do? Did she call the police? No, she just shook her head and laughed. And you could understand her reaction, saying, "Oh, what am I going to do? They're never going to catch this guy." But on the other hand, if you let these type of crimes go, then the concern is the criminals will say, well, if I could get away with this one, I'll escalate. Perhaps the guy on the train who jumped the turnstile on the train would say, I already jumped the turnstile, got away with a small one. Now I'll mug somebody next. If you remember in New York City, for you New Yorkers, they also got rid of the squeegee people. In other words, a quality of life thing. If we let people do these petty type of crimes and inconvenience life, then it will escalate and get worse and worse and worse. So the Torah is telling us here, yes, don't steal. Of course, we do not want you to steal. But if you want to avoid escalating to theft, then make sure also not to be deceitful and be honest with other people. Because if you accustom yourself to being deceitful, it's likely only a matter of time until you cross the line, perhaps even inadvertently cross the line. I'm not suggesting you're going to go into a store and say, stick them up and rob somebody at gunpoint. But perhaps you'll commit genevat dat. In other words, you'll steal somebody's intellectual property. You'll plagiarize something. What Chazal is telling us, our sages are telling us, and tell us it's in Pirkei Avot is, it's a slippery slope. Avera goeret avera. You do one sin, it leads to another and another. You plagiarize and then you try to cover up the fact you plagiarized, and it's lie upon lie upon lie. Conversely, our sages in Pirkei Avot teach us mitzvah goeret mitzvah goeret mitzvah. You do one mitzvah and it leads to another and another. I'll give you an example. You come to shul in the morning, you daven, that's a mitzvah. Then after, perhaps you hear the rabbi speak about Torah, or you learn Torah of Havruta at shul for a few minutes, that's another mitzvah. And then as they're passing around the pushka, you put a little contribution in for tzedakah. Maybe you're talking to somebody and you realize this person could use some help. You do a favor for them later in the day. Now suddenly out of one mitzvah, you've performed 4 separate mitzvot. The lesson of the broken window theory should be applied to Colleyville as well. The lesson is we need a robust response to such actions to nip it in the bud. We all know we have had way too many of these attacks in the last few years. I cannot believe how much time I've had to dedicate to speaking about anti-Semitism. If you had told me 10 years ago, as a rabbi in America, I was going to be talking about anti-Semitism in America and how to fight it frequently, I'd say you're nuts. Anti-Semitism is low, and there are so many other issues in the Jewish community we have to address. But unfortunately, it's become a bigger problem in the last few years. Now, it is great that people pushed back immediately and said, this hostage incident in the shul there has to be labeled anti-Semitic. The message must be that we will call out anti-Semitism and call it anti-Semitism. We cannot allow others to play politics with our safety. Shabbat shalom.